Renee Danser.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, that's exciting. I like applause at the beginning. So we're going to talk about rigorous evaluation in the law. Never, but in the words of the great Justin Bieber, never say never, so maybe. So I work at the Access to Justice Lab. Thank you all for coming and joining me today. I'm a former court administrator. I think many of you know me. But now I'm at the lab, and at the lab we focus on studying interventions that are designed to improve access to justice. And we do this with one specific methodology, and that's kind of our niche. And I'll talk to you a little bit about law school innovation labs and their niches in a bit. But our methodology is the randomized control trial. So our mission is really twofold. It's not only to improve access to justice by telling you what does and doesn't work to get us there, but it's also to hope to coax you all into using rigorous evaluation and include that in all project designs with regularity so that concept becomes commonplace. We encourage you to evaluate and iterate. So it's not necessarily about evaluate and destroy, but evaluate and iterate. There's value in learning the positives and negatives of each project, right? So I want to just give you, before we get down to it, I want to give you a little idea of what you can expect from our talk today. So first I'm going to talk to you about evaluation generally and what it means to conduct a rigorous evaluation of your intervention. And then I'm going to help you understand how to design a study and what all goes into it. We want to help you with your evaluations. We do go out and find our own funding to do that. You can call on us at any time, but I also want to take this time to let you know what to expect when you're designing a study, and maybe you're able to do that on your own even without our help. And after that, we're going to do a little mock study operation. So it's going to be interactive. It'll involve you working with your colleagues in the room. And for those on the live stream, you're welcome to participate. I'm happy to have you tweet your questions and comments. You can tweet directly to me. It's at Renee Danser, not difficult to find. But don't forget the conference hashtag. And then at the debrief, we're going to do a debrief as a group. And anyone on the live stream can also tweet questions at that time as well. And then in the final piece we're going to do is the debrief and questions. We'll reconvene as a group, talk about what you all discussed in your group, and then we'll talk about questions and issues as a group. And hopefully you'll feel like you can take away from this session a general understanding of the importance of evaluation and what it looks like so that you can do that on your own in your own courts. Okay, so are we ready? Let's go. Okay, so we're going to start with our crash course on evaluation. And for those of you who are at eCourts, some of these slides will be a little recognizable. That was by design. So what does it mean to rigorously evaluate your intervention? I mean, really, who can get rid of this guy, right? This is a great slide. So we focus on the one specific methodology, the randomized control trial. So why do we do that? It's really the only reliable way to test whether a treatment causes an outcome, so whether something works the way we had hoped it would work. I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the randomized control trial to set the stage for your evaluations, but also talk to you a little bit about other ways to conduct studies if the randomized control trial doesn't fit your work, and things to consider as you're just developing a consideration of your methodology as well as your potential partnerships. But before I do that, I think it's always important to stress, in our setting in particular, that rigorous evaluation is not anecdotal evidence. So if you have a hunch that something's occurring, or if your spidey sense is telling you that something is occurring, that is anecdotal evidence. It just means that you feel like it's happening, but you can't really show that it's true. So it could be correct, but you really won't know if your hunch is correct until you test it with rigor. And so we all have the interesting experience of having judicial anecdotal evidence, which usually comes in the form of, that's not what I'm seeing in my courtroom. So you can present all the data and statistics you like, oftentimes, well, not oftentimes, but periodically, and have some skeptics. And so I'm hoping to help you navigate through that here today as well. Okay, so just to frame the evaluation piece, This is emblematic of our typical courtrooms that we see, right? We often have really busy courthouses, lots of work. We see ourselves as putting out fires mostly. We identify problems, then we identify solutions, and we implement, and then we go straight from the idea to the field. And we never look back because we believe we have solved the problem. But evaluation is asking you to look back, to test your solution, to be sure it's doing what you're hoping it would do, and that there aren't any unintended consequences, or that the unintended consequences are not harmful. Certainly, you could have unintended consequences that are good, and then keep them. That's great. Okay, so I lost my cursor. At Law School Innovation Labs, we want to help you test your solutions, and we do this at any time in the process. You can bring to us an idea in advance before you've implemented it, and we can test it as a pilot, or we can test it when it's in the field. We really don't care. Most Law School Innovation Labs are fully funded, so it's not like a technical assistance grant or something like that. We either are looking for the funding for ourselves if we need to acquire funding to help you with the study, but we're never asking you to contribute to that. And this is just a sample of some of my colleague labs, and this is where I want to just stop for a second and give you a little idea of what working with an innovation lab at a law school can look like. Each of us have our own niche. Ours is the randomized control trial. There are some labs that focus on the design piece of an intervention, so they'll talk with you about the problem you're seeing, think about a solution, and design it, and iterate, and do some user testing with that. Some Law School Innovation Labs really focus only on tech tools. Some are focused on immersive student learning as well. So in addition to helping solve a real-world problem, they're working on teaching students about, especially law students, about what the real practice of law is like, which is totally different than what the theoretical practice of law is like and what is taught in law schools. So it's important for you to take some time to just get to know the innovation labs, especially if you have one that's local. That's always a great partnership, but you shouldn't feel constrained by the geographic location of the labs. Most labs are not necessarily just looking for local projects, and I know that we specifically are not. So there are ups and downsides, and very few downsides, but it's more about picking a project or picking a lab that suits the goals that you have with your project. And so I just want to give you some opportunity to think about that and do a little research. For example, when we do a randomized control trial, we're not working on a semester schedule. With that, we certainly incorporate students, and that's a great experience. I can tell you about some studies using students where we have incorporated students, and the learning that happens during the study is really awesome. But we're not necessarily working on a semester schedule, and we really can't because a randomized control trial takes kind of a long time to complete. So, but there are some labs that are doing that and promise quicker results. Okay. So I'm going to give you just a brief introduction to the randomized control trial. This is a really rudimentary diagram of what a randomized control trial is. So what you want to do is identify at least 2 conditions to evaluate. It can be more, but you have to have a big enough sample population to learn something statistically significant. So that's just one thing you want to be sure of. Then you randomly allocate study participants into each of the conditions, and then you measure the outcomes. So just stopping there for a second, going back to a couple things. The sample population size does need to be large enough to see something statistically significant, but that does not necessarily mean that excludes rural and mid-size jurisdictions. And so I don't want you to come away thinking that you have to be a large metropolitan court for us to be able to work with you. That is not true at all. In fact, we're excited to incorporate rurality into studies whenever we can. And so what that means is if we need a large enough sample size and the case caseload that you have may not reach that, what we can do is partner with other jurisdictions to include additional jurisdictions into the study that will allow a larger sample size. That can mean clustering rural jurisdictions together. It can mean clustering urban, mid-sized, and rural jurisdictions together. It can also mean clustering different states together. So we have, I'm working on one study now, for example, that is both in Pennsylvania and in the state of Kansas. It's actually only in 4 counties in Pennsylvania and the entire state of Kansas, but 2/3 of the population will come, of our study population will come from those 4 counties in Pennsylvania. Actually, most of them will come from 1 county in Pennsylvania, and the other 3 are pretty rural. So just giving you an idea that I don't want your jurisdiction size to seem like it is either a boon or a burden. It is neither. We can make it work either way. The other thing I wanted to stop here and just remind everyone to, or just call your attention to, is we randomly allocate consenting study participants. That's really important. All of our studies incorporate informed consent, fully informed consent, and that's pretty important when you're studying the effects on human beings, right? You want to make sure the person that is a study participant that you're going to be looking at the effect of the outcome on this individual is fully informed and understands what exactly you're doing, what you hope to learn, and what data you're going to be looking at about that person. And I'm going to talk to you about the kind of details of how to develop informed consent in a little bit, but I just want to prime the pump on that one. Okay, so we're measuring outcomes. Outcomes are usually, did this intervention solve the problem that you identified? But that doesn't have to be where it stops. There can be other outcomes that we measure as well. So to give you an example, in the context of a study that we're doing hoping to show that drug courts can reduce recidivism and prevent relapse, we're looking at whether or not these courts have an impact on housing stability and employment stability for those that process through the drug court as opposed to those that process through the typical criminal justice process. So this helps us to understand more than just legal outcomes. We aren't just attempting to determine what gets to the best legal result. It's not just about time to disposition or were you successful or unsuccessful in your legal case, but we also want to know what gets to the best result for a community and an individual. So at many innovation labs, not just at the Access to Justice Lab, but it's certainly at the Access to Justice Lab, we do hold this value to be dear, that we want to highlight the importance of and develop best practices in holistic programming, not just understanding legal outcomes. Okay, that was Crash Course on Evaluation. Happy to take questions now or throughout the program, or we can wait till the end. But I also want to get to the development of a study design too. Okay. Okay, this slide looks simple, but I'm going to chat at you for a really long time now, okay? I just didn't want to make a billion slides with one word. So this slide is intending to give you kind of an idea of some questions you should be thinking about when you're looking at evaluating your program. Feel free to stop me, because I really am going to chat at you for a little while just with this slide up. Ask questions as we go, and then we're going to get into the interactive portion. So I'm going to bore you and then make you move. Okay, so it's really important to think about the project you want to implement and the study that you want to implement, and what project already exists that you want to study. So you have to think about, what do you want to know? Sometimes the best way to answer that question is to think about, what are you hoping that this intervention does? Are you just hoping for case processing outcomes to improve, or are you also hoping to solve or help solve a social issue that you're noticing in your community? For example, if you think back to that other outcome slide that I just had up, you may suspect, for example, that housing outcomes are affected by lengthy case processing times of domestic violence matters. You may have a hypothesis that if domestic violence cases are processed quicker, then victims will have less uncertainty about housing outcomes and they'll have, about housing options, and will be more likely to stabilize their housing and reduce re-victimization. So how do you test that? you can conceptualize a new, more streamlined process, randomize cases to process through your existing process, which is the status quo, or to process through the new streamlined process, and then look at outcomes like case processing time, housing outcomes for victims, new case filings for the same person, which may show re-victimization, although I encourage you to think about other ways to show that. So this example has you thinking about what the process looks like now, and then what will change in the process in order to incorporate the study. But these are really high-level thoughts about what you'll change. And when you're developing a study design, I really need you to get into the weeds when you're thinking about process. You want to think about each and every step along the way. So think about what is the first step to initiating this case. It's often the filing, right? So then what happens? Who gets the filing? What do they do with it? What does the filer need to do? How does the filer actually get the filing to you? Literally map out every step, because once you do that, you're poised and ready to think about at what point is the best time to randomize, and how does that affect your day-to-day operations to staff. So what you don't want to do is is to ask people to participate in a study, and then they are at some later point screened out of the study for eligibility. It's just disingenuous. So if we think about filing as the first interaction the person has with the court, that could be a good place to randomize. But like I said, you want to avoid asking people to participate in a study that don't meet your eligibility criteria. So if you occasionally kick back filings, for example, for mistakes or insufficiency, you don't want to ask someone to participate in the study until you've already done that screening. So a full filing or a complete filing is your eligibility criteria in that example. If you have some sort of other eligibility criteria, like often exists in an ARD program, for example, where let's say your ARD program requires individuals to be a first-time offender with only certain charges, and that they have to be able to pay the costs and fees of the program to participate. So in that instance, you want to make sure your person meets all the criteria before you ask them to participate in the study. Your criteria are that this is the first time you've seen them before, that they only have a few charges, and that they can pay. So that means you might have to do your ability to pay screening before you invite people to participate in the study. All this is to say, it's important for you to map out the process. Process mapping is something I think we do a lot in court management, right? It's important for you to map out the process and really pick the spot in that process that's sufficiently close to the beginning of the whole process, but also is after all of your eligibility screening, so that your invitation to participate in the study is genuine. Like I said, you don't want to go through the entire process of inviting someone to participate in the study. They say yes, you consent them into the study, and then you say, oh, sorry, you're not eligible. It's just not nice. Okay, and so this brings us to the consent process. Inviting people to participate in the process is when you actually obtain consent. And consent consists of verbal discussion of the study, what it means for the potential study participant, what are the potential upsides and downsides, what can they expect and for how long. If you're looking at outcomes beyond legal outcomes, what data are you looking at? So are you going to ask them to complete surveys? How often? What are they going to get if you do that, if anything? Are you going to be looking at administrative data collected by some other agency? You just need to make sure that they know that. Then you tell them all of that verbally. It's good to create an actual script for that, because it can be a lot to get out. Then you also have a signed consent form that reiterates all of that in writing and asks for their signature. It's not until you get that consent that you can actually randomize human beings into your study. So it's really important to know that studying human beings does require, this is the ethics of studying the effects of something on human beings. So if somebody doesn't consent into your study, what do? There's no don't deliver justice option. If they don't consent, you just proceed business as usual with the status quo, and you just don't get to learn about the outcomes in this particular case. This is like always the hardest part for study partners to conceptualize. What if they say no? Then don't overthink it. You just proceed on. You just don't get to learn about their the outcomes in their specific case. Just go on as you normally would. It's not an affront. It's not the end of the world. There will be other people that will consent. Every study has a group of people that don't consent, and that's totally fine. And then the final kind of pieces on this slide, the final questions for you to think about is really is engagement, really questions of engagement. So it's important to think about bring all the people that you need to bring to the table to talk about the study. And if you're looking at outcomes beyond court outcomes, it's really important for you to think about who those community partners are too. It's really not a good idea to conduct a study in any location without telling the stakeholders that may have an interest in the data you're collecting. And they're going to learn. They're going to know. So that's not a storm you want to endure. So we do this right all the time in court management. We're always working on engaging. I just want to call to your attention that sometimes doing studies of this nature that may have community impacts is important to think about who your community stakeholders are too, not just justice system actors too. They may be other community partners. And that also, having that type of engagement may help you down the line with data collection as well. And then part of engagement includes engaging the staff, especially the frontline staff that will participate in components of the study, like the consent process. This is the place, the consent process is, and the frontline staff portion, the randomization, is usually where most manipulations of studies occur. For example, if we round back to the DV example that I just talked about a couple minutes ago, by the way, just an example, I made it up. It's not a real study that I'm working on. You may have a staff person who's handling that consent process. They may meet with the victim and really, really feel like the victim needs this new expedited process, right? They're a true believer in this new process. And so rather than asking the victim to participate in the study, they just, and go through the consent process, they just assign the victim to your special docket and schedule the victim accordingly. So that's nice, right? So most manipulation is not for malicious reasons. It's really because somebody is thinking that this person is really in need of the intervention and they're a true believer. And that's a really nice thing, but it's important to stress to anyone that's participating in the study, especially during that randomization portion, to talk to them about the long-term goals of the study, and that while you may think you're helping one person, you're actually hurting a lot of other people by not actually testing the intervention completely. And we're not sure, remember, we're only testing this intervention because we're not fully sure if this is exactly the right scheme. So it's important to just get that buy-in from your staff and all the frontline people that may participate at the beginning. Okay, that was a lot of chatting at you with one slide. Questions? Oh, yes, Michelle. Sure.
A question about informed consent.
Yeah.
Do you believe that it's needed for post hoc analyses that may still be published or used? I mean, you didn't know ahead of time that you were going to be using data that we collect on a regular basis. That's the majority of how we look at the effectiveness of what we're doing or identify what needs to be improved. And so how do you feel about informed consent?
So you mean you aren't actually doing the study in real time, right? You're just looking at data that's already happened.
Right.
So it's an observational study. I don't think that you necessarily need informed consent for that.
Do you get pushback from any of your courts about the informed consent process?
No, I haven't experienced that, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I think the informed consent process actually makes people feel a little more at ease. The real challenge, so there's a number of ways to answer this. So it's not just courts that may push back. Some data partners may push back. So for example, to study labor outcomes, oftentimes we try to engage the Department of Labor, or to study housing outcomes, we try to engage whatever entity controls the homeless management information system. Usually these are executive branch offices. They have their own legal teams. They have their, and whenever you get the lawyers involved, it gets crazy. But, and they have their own like policies of authorization. And so usually we also work not just with our field partners, but with our data partners in developing the informed consent process. And so that's another, I mean, it's not a super, it doesn't have to be super rigid. Every consent form is tailored to the study. The consent forms are also designed to be in plain language so that study participants, even though you're verbally describing it to them, also can read it and understand it. The hope is for that to be the case. We also, every university and most research entities have an institutional review board that also has to review your consent form, and that's like the ethical oversight for the study. And that's usually that's the pushback, not the courts. But I think that honestly, the informed consent feels more like protection for the field partner than anything else. It's about incorporating it into the process such that it doesn't become super burdensome for the staff and for your court process. And that I think is the place where the pushback may occur the most. Other than the idea of, it's really hard to think about randomizing people into one intervention over another. And so I'm happy to chat with you about ethics and how that is ethical and when that is ethical. But the consent process really isn't I think the stickiest of the wickets. Thanks. Okay, well, we are going to move on to trying to do a brief study here today in 60 minutes, well, under 60 minutes now, well under 60 minutes. It's not a big deal. I just want to give you an idea of how you could create your own study without my help. Love to help you all, and happy to talk about how to do that too. But I just want to give you an idea of kind of, it sounds hard, but it's probably a little bit more simple than you realize. Okay, so this is the group work portion. I've developed a fictitious scenario, but it could very easily be reality. I did not adapt this from any one study we're doing, nor did I adapt it from any specific court that I've worked with. But my colleague April is working on a drug court study in Montana, but I've not talked to her about the nitty-gritty details, so this does not at all come from that study. Total fiction, pure fiction. Okay. So here you have the knowns in our scenario. In a second, I'm going to randomize the room, and that randomization will also serve to put you in groups. And then I'm going to give you your discussion charge, and it'll be mostly what you should think about when you're designing your study. Then we'll come back together as a group and talk about what you all identified and talked about. And I'm not going to ask you to like pick a spokesperson or anything. We're just going to have like a discussion. For those on the live stream, participating on your own, or if you're in a group in a live stream, you can participate in your group. You can randomize your group too, you'll see in a second. And you're welcome to tweet. I have my Twitter up, and we can keep your comments and thoughts into the debrief as well. Okay, so we're developing a drug court in our court, and we want to evaluate the court. These are the knowns in the drug court implementation. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to read those, because I'm not going to put this slide back up. They're not big, it's not a big deal, but I'm going to give you a couple minutes to read them. And the slides are in the app if you are having trouble seeing this. Okay, looks like, we've all read them? We're good? Okay. All right, so we're going to randomize the room. I'm doing this just to give you an idea of how randomization works. It sounds complicated, it is not, but it is also not every other person goes to the drug court. That's not random. It's like a coin flip or a roll of the die. You can flip a coin and get heads a few times in a row. You can roll a die and get the same number a few times in a row, or seemingly never get the number that you really need to get. Okay, so we can randomize in a number of different ways, and we do randomize studies in a number of different ways. We usually tailor it to the needs of the field partner. So we can randomize with basic demographic information that's innocuous to the intervention. We can also create a computer randomizer for a study. We can use some other instrument, like a pre-printed pad of paper that randomly assigns numbers and then assigns people to certain interventions. So like I said, we can really develop a scheme that fits what you need to help your staff complete the study. And so I'm going to use an example of that right now to randomize you all into groups to work on the interactive portion of the presentation. No power poses are required, but you're welcome to do them. Okay, for those of you that have a birth year that ends in an odd number, move to this side of the room. For those of you that have a birth year that ends in an even number, move to that side of the room. So for example, if you were born in 1983, that your birth year ends in a 3, that's here. If you were born in 1960, your birth year ends in a 0, that's a tricky one, but an even number. Go over there. You do not have to disclose the actual year of birth. None of us can guess that just by seeing the side of the room that you're on. And so you're going to be kind of talking together, so it'll be good to kind of move together if you can. But you'll see that there are actually less people on this side than there are on that side, and that's totally okay. And on the live stream, if you're in a group, randomize. Okay. All right, so here are the things I want you all to talk about in your groups. I want you to design the study by thinking through some of the more challenging questions. Feel free to ask questions as you work on this. You can just shout them out. I literally do not need to walk around because this is a small room. So feel free to shout out any questions as you have them. They'll be beneficial to both sides. And I'll give you about 10 to 15 minutes to chat, and then we'll come back together as a group and we'll do a good long debrief. Okay? So go, do. Yes.
Not the random one, yeah. It's, yeah, drug court implementation. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, your county government is divided on the issue. Half of the leadership believes drug courts help you solve underlying addiction issues. The other half believes they're a waste of money. So, it's drug court implementation. Yeah, okay, all right.
What is the issue they're divided
They're divided on the issue of whether or not drug courts are helpful or effective. Yeah. So some of them think, or they're divided on whether or not you should even have one. Some of them think drug courts will help solve an addiction problem that they've noticed in the community. Others think it's a waste of money. This could totally be real. These are the issues you probably do. Yeah, exactly. Those are totally the two camps, okay? conversations, and they're all great, and I don't want to interrupt, but we have probably about 10 minutes, so I want to pull us back together as a group and talk about what you decided or what questions you had. I mean, there's no way to really develop a study in 10 or 15 minutes, so I know a lot of really what happened was a discussion about questions and uncertainty, which is great. So let's come back as a group, and I really just want to have a discussion. We got no live tweets, by the way. I'm really disappointed. That doesn't count. You're not on the live stream. So I'm just going to leave the questions up on the board, but we don't have to talk. I'd love to hear what you came up with in response to some of these questions, but I'd also really like to hear about some of the challenges that you were working through or that barriers you thought existed in developing the study. And for the live stream, I'm just going to either stress that if you have the microphone, that it's actually not projecting sound. It's only for the online audience, so keep it close to your mouth. Or I'll repeat your question for you if you choose not to do that. Okay, so anyone, what did you discuss? What stymied you? What was a good success?
One thing that we came across was the third bullet, how you avoid manipulation of the study. Like everything that you were coming up with that would avoid manipulation also would reduce transparency. Like you have to be secretive about it.
So tell me, let's talk about what you came up with, some of your ideas. Oh, and finish your sentence. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
We were talking about this, we would take everybody who was eligible and willing to participate in the work, but we actually would have to send access to the drug court resources and then compare it to the that would be represented as possible.
So that would be, and you're not talking about informed consent in that process. You're just talking about dividing people into two different interventions.
Based on all the people that we were expecting to bring to the table, and the different relations of all the different people that we were to be completely open and honest about what we were trying to get at. They may be sending different public defenders to drug court to get what they wanted. They may be sending different treatment providers to make the point that they're wanting to make. So how do you identify all the people and be as open and honest with them as possible to show that you're being objective and you're being all-encompassing, but also make sure that they are not.
Yeah. So that's kind of a trick question. It's good to understand everybody's different needs in a study and their desires, their outcome desires, but the study is not really about fulfilling those needs or the desires for outcomes of anyone, even yourself, right? The commitment that you make when you do a study is to be true and honest to the actual results, or at least I hope that that's what we do. And so you may come away with you find things that you really didn't want to know, or you were really not expecting, or it's really not, it doesn't make your program look great. That sounds terrible, but it actually presents you with a great opportunity to, iterate and do what you actually are hoping to accomplish. I mean, so that's what I really hope you get to. You are always going to have, there will always be scenarios where manipulation is possible. Transparency is important. Informed consent is required. So you do need to tell people that are participating in the study, that will be your study participants, that are the people you're looking at their results, that it is a randomized process, that once they consent, they will be randomly assigned to one of these two interventions. And what that means is you may either go to drug court and be provided all of the resources that come with drug court, or you may go through the typical criminal justice process, which, by the way, does sometimes include some of those same resources, but it's usually at the discretion of either your public defender or your probation or parole officer, and at the availability of the resource, right? So there's also different resources, community resources have only a certain capacity that they can hold, and sometimes drug courts will, kind of incorporate a standard amount of capacity from those resources. So it's important that the study participant know that they could be assigned to either one of those, and that they're consenting, that they recognize that they could get one or the other, and they could get either one, and that maybe one to them seems better than the other, but they may not get the best one. You're going to have you're right, you've identified absolutely opportunities for manipulation that have occurred in real studies. Yes, you will have attorneys that will try to challenge the validity of the study during the process. You will have the weird attorney assignments happening as you'll have sometimes, if you have a study in the criminal justice arena, you could have law enforcement that figures out a way to, and none of it is malicious because they don't want to study. Usually, that could be a reason, but usually it's because they believe that what they're already doing is the right thing for the person, or that this person could really benefit from this new intervention, and a random assignment is somehow not fair. So it is kind of a trick question. You can't prevent all manipulation. It's just really important to think about the ways manipulation could occur, and then try to mitigate those. And oftentimes that's about stakeholder buy-in. And allowing people to recognize kind of what they could get out of the study too. And sometimes incorporating some of their needs into the study. So like data collection of certain things that you otherwise might not have done, but it's easy enough to do. Mm-hmm. Anyone, I'm like making eye contact with people on purpose. Wait, did you just tweet me? Okay, thank you. It was praise, not a question. Okay, does anyone else want to share something that you all talked about in your groups? We have just a couple of minutes, I think. So, I want to ask you the big question then, which is up here. What are you going to do with the knowledge once the study is done? So we don't want you to just do a study and then do nothing, right? So what would you do with it once the study's done? Yes. That's okay if you didn't get to it. I appreciate your own individual ideas.
One aspect of it would be to bring in stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's exactly right. So you want to take your results and develop the plan of action. And usually your results are going to come away, you're going to come away with results that tell you things that you could be doing differently that might improve results. And they'll tell you things that you're doing well that you should sustain. And so then you have the opportunity to not only iterate your process, but if you really like studies, you can then study your new process too. And isn't that so exciting? But you're absolutely right. Please don't do your study and then do nothing. And when we complete a study, we always continue on with those results. And so usually for us, that means educating national stakeholders about the results, certainly in conjunction with our field partners. It's really important to us that our field partners remain a part of that conversation in a way that they want to remain a part of it. But you can really develop policy using the results of a study. You can sway your stakeholders to, especially your funding authorities is a good place to go. And so we always take our study results and we publish any study results that we have for purposes of replication. It's important also to have rigorous evaluation done over and over again to make sure that this was not an anomaly, but also to allow other jurisdictions to take what you did, the good things that you did, and do it themselves. I think I'm out of time. So let me just get you to the end. And so I hope that this opportunity gave you this session gave you the opportunity to not have a question about whether you're going to evaluate your intervention, but actually declare that you will. You can find me at this email address, which is really small. I'm sorry, I did not notice that till I got up here. But it's rdanser@law.harvard.edu. Email me with any questions, any follow-up at all, or I'm happy to chat.